This is Brass Check, and we've got a very interesting guest. Astute Brass Check viewers know that a couple of times we have played a very interesting recording made in 2014. It's a three-way conversation between Terry Michael, the great journalist, and Dave Crow, who's an extremely interesting mind scientifically, and journalist Beth Ely. Beth, welcome.
Hi. Yep, you can call me Beth. Most people know me as Elizabeth in my byline.
Okay.
But I am so honored to be here and honored that you thought of me. I'm just thrilled to be doing this. I don't know what to say.
Well, we're thrilled to have you. As I mentioned to you, and I'll tell to the listeners right now, I consider that 2014 conversation you three had a sort of like a Rosetta Stone of understanding how we got into the predicament we're in now. The focus of that conversation was Tony Fauci. And while it would be simplistic to blame, all evils of the world on Tony Fauci, he is sort of a Hitler-like character in the sense that he's an important front man for a very sinister operation. And I had a feeling that there was something not right about him. But once I heard you, and the focus of the call was pretty much Terry and Terry's very deep research into Fauci's background. And for people that haven't listened to it, I'll post it right below this so folks can listen to it in detail. But basically, he's been around for 36 years, almost as long as J. Edgar Hoover. He is the third highest paid bureaucrat in the entire federal bureaucracy. He's allowed to double dip. In other words, he's allowed to give grant money to foundations and universities and research centers, and then years later get large cash prizes from them for being such a great scientist. And on it goes. So that's basically Tony Fauci. But what's most interesting about Tony Fauci is that he has been involved in medical scams for as long as he's been in the business of medicine. And his first and greatest hit until COVID was AIDS. Now, it's very interesting. I was talking to a friend about this, and he said, "Oh, Ken, you better be careful. A lot of your gay subscribers are going to be, very angry with you for saying, anything." And I said, "Are you kidding? There's plenty of gay people that know AIDS is a scam." He goes, "Really?" I said, "Yeah. They're not all buying it." And so he did a little research himself, and he realized, "Oh, I see." But he's an intelligent, sensitive, informed man, and he completely drank the Kool-Aid that AIDS is real as presented, and that all these wonderful people wearing red ribbons and marching in parades and advocating for Africa and the poor are actually humanitarians, and nothing could be further from the truth. So Beth has been deep into that world for, I guess we could say, decades at this point.
Yeah, about 27 years since I found out about it. I kind of came out about it to my friends and church mates in 1994. So it's been 25 to 27 years.
And when you say came out, it's problematic. You get a lot of pushback. You get some hostile reactions. You get some personal attacks. Much like
yes. Yes, I got midnight phone calls.
Wow.
From people at my own church. Yes.
Wow. Much like what goes on today with COVID. And what's so interesting, and we've certainly been talking about this ad infinitum the last month or two or more, the pattern of COVID, I mean, it's a different disease, in quotes, but it's the same bullshit, and the same structure, and the same people. So Beth really knows the original AIDS story and the original players and the original psychological dynamics of the whole thing. In fact, pre-interview, we were talking about some of the ways AIDS has been used as a way to extract billions and billions of dollars through the suffering of human beings, and we're going to maybe touch on some of those mechanics as well. But tell us a little bit about you, how you got started, how you discovered this, the initial cognitive dissonance when the whole world was marching in one direction and you were like going, wait a minute, this is not right.
Yeah, well, first of all, just to say I agree that Corona, COVID, whatever they're calling it, SARS-CoV-2 or whatever, it is AIDS 2.0. So yes, they did perfect the propaganda and mind control on AIDS. And throughout the 27 years that I have known about this and off and on studying it, doing work for the group for the scientific reappraisal of the HIV/AIDS hypothesis, also known as Rethinking AIDS for a while, I got involved with some of the key players in this. What has struck me has been more about the propaganda than about the science. Like the science was pretty much exhausted with the fact that they didn't really have a credible test, as they don't have a credible test for COVID now. But as early as 1992, I figured that out when a friend handed me a book while I was working as a temp at the Hemophilia Foundation. Mm-hmm. And nothing coming across my desk on AIDS in the blood supply ever made any sense at that point. So that's how I got involved in this. A lot of people would have just said, I don't want to hear about this. This will make a weirdo out of me. I don't want to be one of those conspiracy theorist people. Mm-hmm. And we didn't have the internet then. It wasn't like people really looked into a lot of stuff, but they did have time to read whole books about it. I remember that same book in like 1989 or 1990. I had encountered in the grocery store, the Whole Foods, like the flagship Whole Foods store in Dallas, Texas, on Lower Greenville, uh-huh. where I had lived previously. In about 1989 or 90, I stuffed it back in the shelf. And I was like, why did you do that? And I said, because my family will not like me. Just like that was, if to be honest with myself. And I was a naive left wing. I don't think everyone who's left wing is naive, and I'm certainly not all that right wing, but I've had that education. I've walked away, in the last 4 or 5 years. But, AIDS was a liberal problem. It was a leftist problem. It was something that the leftists were all up in arms about. And if you were conservative, you were to say, oh, I don't really care about those people. That was a script you were supposed to do. And I was definitely not a person to say, I don't care about people. Mm-hmm. I care deeply about people. Mm-hmm. And I wore my red ribbon proudly when it was offered. And I had actually lived in that neighborhood where Dallas Buyers Club was supposed to have been about, the Oak Lawn neighborhood of Dallas, prior to moving to New York to go to journalism school. And I was young, I was idealistic, I was 29 years old, and this shocked me because I could not refute the facts in this actually poorly written book, and all I needed to know was there was no test for this. So what were people getting sick of? Oh, yes, they were getting sick from obvious lifestyle factors. Obviously, in Africa, they weren't being fed carefully enough, like they were hardly able to get a hold of food in some places. And there always was another reason for one of the many diseases they had. So, I don't want to go on and on and on about it, but, I quickly exhausted the science, not because I was a real science whiz, but because the logic on top of it, just guiding the whole thing, made no sense. You have to have a test, and you have to have a disease that is identifiable as being caused by this one factor, not a whole host of them, and not a whole host of diseases that already existed in these particular populations. It wasn't like tuberculosis was just invented in the 1980s. So, or candida, fungal problems, which is what most gay men dying of AIDS or supposedly dying of AIDS have. So it's different in different parts of the world. And so I quickly got tired of science, although I did take a foray into it with the protease inhibitors coming out in the mid-90s. I wrote an article for the Townsend Letter in Seattle or somewhere in Washington. And I got fascinated with the propaganda, the way that they mess with your head. Why do people fall for this? Why do people just instantly believe? And I instantly believed. I just didn't have that much invested in it. So since then, I have worked for the Rethinking AIDS as their public relations person. You have to hand it to me. I've done the worst public relations job in the world because there's still so much vilified. But I have to pat myself on the back that they, when I see them cited on recent YouTubers, that are questioning the COVID thing, I know these people. I know that I got their names out there, that part of the reason, ripples in a pond, that they got there was because of the work that I did. The fact that anybody even knows their names.
Yeah, like for instance, if we mention some of the pioneers of it, Celia Farber, of course, John Lauriston, I think Terry Michael would qualify.
Terry Michael came actually rather late to it.
Okay.
Yes, he was very good at what he did. He put up websites. He was very public about opposing this. Yeah.
Gary Null, the health educator, was really active, making films
Yes.
and doing all sorts of things like that. So there were a lot of people, not a lot of people, but there was a quorum of people working steadily to try to educate the public. There were just a few little technical points I want to cover before we go forward on the propaganda side, and I definitely want to focus on the propaganda because that's where the rubber meets the road on this. Many of my listeners are aware, but some may not be aware, that when AIDS first appeared, and I put AIDS in quotes, it was two different diseases, one of the lungs and one of basically the skin and lymph nodes, I guess.
That is correct.
And by the time they finished expanding the definition of AIDS, and I'm not sure they've even finished yet, but I think it became 29 different diseases. So if you had any one of 29 different diseases, and as you pointed out, they all already existed before, quote, AIDS, but if you had any one of them, you could be called an AIDS patient. So
yeah, except for one condition, which is a T cell count under some 200 or something. Don't quote me on that one, but it's a CD4 T cell count. A test result is considered full-blown AIDS.
So that's
the one that didn't exist before.
And I think it's important to mention that you could have a T cell count like that, and it could have no effect on your functional health whatsoever, right?
Yes, or you could have a very high T cell count and be very sick. In fact, I think that what I heard, and it's a wild simplification. Trust me, the immune system and the humoral, and I forget the other type, the T cells and the B cells and things. It really challenges me. That doesn't mean I don't know what's going on, because I look at the surface and I see these people are sick for very good reasons. I don't have to count their T cells, okay?
Right.
But there was something that was mentioned in HEAL meetings quite often, which was that in the beginning they had all these people who were indeed sick in diseases they hadn't really seen a lot of before, which was not pneumococcal, PCP pneumonia, which is actually a fungal pneumonia, and Kaposi sarcoma, the skin condition that you referenced.
Yep.
It's slightly different from a melanoma. It's got a different texture to it, and it can grow. So they had just those, and they had obviously a lot of other things. Just people were not well, and they were sort of showing a pattern too. Like, wow, did these guys all show up in the same place at the same time? Well, yes. The same bathhouses, the same time, drinking the same liquor, taking the same drugs, getting the same prescriptions ad infinitum for tetracycline and other antibiotics. So you can expect the same illnesses. But about the what were we talking about?
No. So it was very important. Yeah. So we're talking about the fact, something that you referred to, and I just want to make sure everybody understood, is there were 29 different diseases.
Okay.
Plus,
I remember.
Yeah.
Yes, there originally were not, but there were very, very sick people. And
there was something,
and you could not deny that. And so what happened was they did test them for their T cells, as part of a whole blood work that they would do, and they noticed a pattern that many of them had low T cells. When they should have had high T cells because they were obviously fighting some kind of infection.
Gotcha.
So that's where that originated. Sorry to get sidetracked there.
No problem. And then the other thing that I think is really important, you mentioned lifestyle causes, and people should know, they can study this history on their own if they want to verify, that there was, some there was a pretty wild party scene going on in the 70s and early 80s that involved a lot of drug use
Yes.
and a lot of abuse of the body and a lot of wild activity that involved in all kinds of infections, and it was not uncommon for somebody to just take a handful of antibiotics and go out and have fun prophylactically. So this was
If you call that fun.
yeah, I know. It's a whole. That's a whole.
I mean, I think that it's dangerous to talk about this, but we do have to talk about this because even though I've been smacked around a lot for blaming the victim, right? Okay, well, first of all, there are no victims, but that I think that we are talking about broken people.
Right.
See, the PR campaign behind this whole thing has these guys as sweet little buttercups who never did a bad thing in their life, and oh yeah, they partied some, and yeah, they had some sex, and they did some drugs, but didn't we all in the 70s? And I don't think that even begins to cover what actually went on. Like just how extreme this lifestyle was. And it's not exactly blaming the victim. I do not. I look at this and I go, oh my God, these guys were so broken.
Right.
They had their very self, their very sexuality, just shamed and just yeah. I don't know what else to say.
And John,
I can't even imagine what that feels like.
I think John Lauriston has done a good job of organizing papers around that subject. For instance, the book called The AIDS Cult.
Yes, my favorite book.
Yeah, where he talks about some of the psychological pressures on that particular group, and we should point out that we're talking about a subset of a subset. It's not every gay man was doing this, and it wasn't even every gay man that was going to, nightclubs. It was a sub. Every there's a percentage of every population that way overdoes it, and these guys were way overdoing it on the drug side and also, the illegal drug side and also the pharmaceutical drug side. And then there was one other element which many heterosexuals have never heard of, even people that did a lot of drugs, something called poppers, which were very popular. They were the financial backbone of many of the gay magazines, the advertisements. Many of the clubs had their, sold poppers, had their own special blends. I heard there was even one club that sprayed popper fumes on the dance floor. I don't know if that's apocryphal, if that actually really happened. But anyway, this was a drug that is very immunosuppressive. And one of the things, when people study this, they will find videotape of Tony Fauci saying, oh, that had nothing to do with the problem.
Yeah. But, as I talk here, I have noted one case among someone I know who swears up and down that he never took poppers. And he has Kaposi's sarcoma now, if that's what it is. And I ran that by John Lauritsen, and he said, look, they all lie. Okay. But I think he's telling the truth. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. Some of these things are source unknown. They could be, John Lauritsen himself would be the first to say these are psychological phenomena. When you get a whole group of people as a group hysteria believing something, then it's very hard to step outside of that. And if you do step outside of that, you will get smacked pretty hard. So it's a religious level. I think that what John Lauritsen and his partner in this project, the AIDS Cult, Ian Young, did was that they really brought out the religious ritual nature of this and how we're kind of hardwired under the surface to believe certain things given certain circumstances. And because it's under the surface, it's not, booga booga bunga bunga, everybody's got a bone in their nose and dancing to make it rain. It's under the surface. We still are those people. And that, to me, was the mind-blowing idea behind the book, The AIDS Cult, and actually the essay that started it, something like The Group Fantasy Origins of AIDS by Casper Schmidt. So, everything about this AIDS thing except just, winding it down to one group, doing that scapegoating of one group is just the playbook for coronavirus.
So let's talk about that. So people are pretty familiar with what's going on in the coronavirus side. How did they structure the whole AIDS hysteria, and then create a movement around it and get everybody to salute the flag and march in step? Because that's basically what they did. What's your insights into how the propaganda worked? What was the first step? What was the second step? What were the key themes? How did they lay them down?
Oh wow, that's a whole other interview.
Oh, okay.
You should interview John Lauritsen about that.
Oh, okay.
But basically, it was a time in our history, the late 70s, basically, when all this started, when gays had been out for about a decade, since the 60s, and there were no rules for this. It was new. And how society would handle this, that was new. And then there was a sharp turn to the right in politics. And with that, unfortunately, in some quarters, I don't think it was everywhere, came a lot of suspicion of gay people, and maybe somewhat rightfully, that they were out to change society in a way that not everybody was ready for or needed. It wasn't like we weren't letting them alone to do what they wanted to do. And so if you remember the 80s, they were a different time. And there was a lot going on in that sharp turn with Reaganism and everything. And there was a lot of panic spread about that, whether rightly or wrongly. And so you had these two factions. You just kind of just like today, you've divided society into two camps. The party animals, which I thought I was part of that crowd, even though I wasn't a party animal. I was just, why not? These are consenting adults. Why are we getting ourselves all bugged about this? And then there was the religious right, okay, which was actually, I had heard later, infiltrated by the CIA. Like, this was not legitimate religion. This was, people just thumping it about, this is terrible, people having sex, and, people have had sex since time immemorial, but, so there was a divide in society. And there were some good points about each side. You do have to hold society together somehow, and the 70s were, way too out of control. But in that, there was a lot of shame in the gay community that was covered up by a wild lifestyle. To say, okay, we've been thrown out of, Indiana or wherever. Let's just camp out in San Francisco, New York, Miami, Dallas, wherever, and Los Angeles, and find our own enclaves. And they did. And there was a film called Paris is Burning in maybe 1989 or so. Beautiful film, a documentary film, which I recommend, about the gay community in certain quarters of Greenwich Village, New York.
Uh-huh.
And it was heartbreaking. It was all these people who were sort of orphans. They were orphans. Pretty much not able to go back to their families. Just drowning their sorrows in drugs and sex, and doing this thing called voguing. They had these beauty pageants where you could cross-dress, and these guys all lived in houses with each other. They were families, and they genuinely loved each other, but they were never able to jump into the heart chakra completely. There was something blocking them. They were damaged. And it was a heartbreaking film. One of the characters, one of the people in it was murdered, just trying to pick up Johns on the West Side Highway or something. Just terrible ways to live. And then there was this glamorization of that, among young gay men, that this is how, this is the cool thing. No, they're broken people. And what kind of person has 10,000 sexual partners by the time they're 25? Well, you have to be pretty psychologically broken to begin with to arrive on that scene. So just to kind of fast forward this, how did all of society get caught into this? Well, that was obviously engineered through the media and everything, and there was a need to keep these institutions such as NIAID, NIH, CDC alive, given the Reagan budget cuts. Reagan wanted to shut some of them down, and they had really dropped the ball on cancer research, and they also had a need to keep the viral theory alive, because by the late 70s it was pretty dead. They were not finding the things that they had said they would find. And so we might have gone as early as the early 80s to more reasonable paradigms such as energy healing, psychological connections between things. We have stayed clearly mechanistic and in this model of medical care that doesn't serve any of us. And that's what's landed us in the COVID era. So, you had one group of people who were like attacking the gays, and then this gay community that said, yeah, come get us, we'll smack you back. And it didn't serve anybody. It only served to make everybody very entrenched in their righteousness. And to prove this as a badge of courage, you became an AIDS activist. If you weren't, it meant you were racist or you're homophobic. And so, these things are not accidents. They don't just occur organically. They're egged on by PR firms. It's said that there's hardly a PR firm in the country that hasn't worked on AIDS.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Wow. And when, people, I think, underestimate the power and reach and resources of the PR industry. It's often presented as this sideline, but it is a powerhouse. And when anybody wants to, for instance, when some horrible dictator wants to polish his image in the United States, they'll give one of these big PR firms, millions of dollars to create all kinds of nonsense, making him and his dictatorial country look great. So the same thing was done, imagine, to promote this sort of this AIDS myth and this.
Yeah, it was PR times 10. It was literally mind control, I believe. Mm-hmm. Using everything that's important to people as a hot button. And I have often likened it to a hurricane seen from the air, right? There's the eye of the hurricane. Everything's calm. Everything's fine there. There's nothing there. There's no science in the middle of AIDS. It's all made up. And yet all around it is all this, angst and death and grief and everything from the manipulation of art to, how we view women and children, narcissism, gay rights,
death wish.
Death wish, yeah.
Fear of contagion.
Africa, yeah, fear of contagion from non-white people. That's a big one. That's a big button to push in people that, the diseases all come from the black people and are spread to the white people. When actually, if you look at history, it's probably gone the other direction more often. So there's all this hullabaloo. And every time you try to talk to people about AIDS, you get an argument about one of those things. Okay, like, oh, I can see you're sexually repressed. That's why you don't believe in AIDS.
Right.
I can see, you don't care about the babies in Africa. No, I'm just saying there's nothing there. So we have to deal with the babies in Africa as the babies in Africa and actually make some headway in that problem. The reason we don't have a cure for racism yet is because they keep telling us it's a problem. It's just like if they couldn't keep telling us it's a problem, they couldn't control us and tell us we're bad and we get in a tizzy and we have to prove ourselves as right and we'll do whatever they tell us to do. So it's a mind control scheme, and we're finally getting hip to it today at this point in history, and I think that's why COVID showed up.
Well, the AIDS thing, and let's take Africa as a little slice of this. It's so sinister because on the one hand they use the so-called humanitarian actions as a cover, and of course as a way to attack people that don't support them. But when you actually look at their operations in Africa, they're telling pregnant women, "Oh, you've got AIDS." What they really
it's terrible.
what they probably really have is malnutrition, malaria, several infections that never got treated properly because there was no medicine, and so they may be unwell. So they're giving these women, instead of real medical care, instead of access to nourishing food, healthy water, real medicine, they're treating everything as if it's AIDS. So pregnant women are being given these terrible antiviral drugs, and then their newborn babies are given them. So not only are they using Africa as a way to attack anybody who questions them, they're also committing a genocide in Africa.
Yes. Oh, yes. And that's why they accuse us of genocide.
Yeah.
Is that projecting much? I mean, we talked about in that interview that you cited from 2014 when we were talking about the cult of Tony.
Right.
Tony Fauci. I've often called those little pockets of, lots of fluff and bullshit and glorifying somebody. I've called them no accountability zones. So, for instance, the Clinton Foundation, which is a fake AIDS organization, and you look behind it and it gets ugly. This is ugly stuff. This is pushing around huge piles of money, trafficking in people, prostitution, rape of underage kids, all this money being thrown around. Well, many starve. And this is not the kind of thing I want to be associated with, but, you put a red ribbon on it, you march people down the street, you tell them this is liberation, this is going to save the world. And, 36, 37 years later, they're still doing it, and it hasn't solved the problems.
Yeah, and the amount of money being spent, I asked someone to do the math for me. I can't remember what she came up with. I think it's $500 billion has been spent on AIDS research alone in the last 36 years.
So that's not even activism or aid to people, like the welfare checks that you get in New York City, or the drugs, the treatments being paid for around the world. I mean, that's a real conservative estimate.
Well, that's just the research dollars.
Yeah.
And people have pointed out that on a per capita basis, the world might spend $20 per person per capita for every heart patient, right, and on research, but $300 or $400 or $500 for every AIDS patient on research.
Right. And you know what? Health comes from nature. Health comes from us. It doesn't come from some highfalutin, high-tech chemical company putting out some piece of garbage that you take twice a day. That's not where health comes from. Health comes from people living in their natural habitat, not being forced into cities and into poverty. And that's what they're pushing us away from even thinking about.
It was interesting. There was an article that came out I think it was the last day of December 2019, and it said that pollution is the number one killer. It's more than drugs, more than alcohol, more than tobacco, more than any other factor. And of course, some of these places that have had some kind of respiratory spike, Wuhan, Northern Italy, New York City, are all places with bad air.
Well, that's part of why I call this AIDS 2.0, because it's the same thing. You could take a place where people are, shitting and eating in the same pile of water, the same stream, and you'll say, oh, there's this virus. They must be having sex with people they shouldn't in these traditional societies. I mean, give me a break. And you'll never look at that, but you'll say, oh, it's a virus. And so, you look at Wuhan and you see how polluted it was, the most polluted city in the world, possibly. And you go, oh, yeah, there was this virus and they were eating bat soup or something. There's always some bizarre story about non-white people, like, eating something weird or doing something weird, right? And people just eat it up instead of the obvious, like what you stated.
I'm reading a really interesting book you might have come across called AIDS, Africa, and Racism. by.
Oh, I love that book.
Isn't that a great book?
The Chiramutas.
Yeah,
Yes.
and
it's actually kind of hilarious.
They're very. It's a serious book, and yet they've got a great sense of humor as well. And they said that. Oh yeah, one of these Harvard scientists said that AIDS came from a monkey, and it was probably an African that gave their child a dead monkey to play with as a toy. And it's like,
Yeah.
what?
Yeah. Well, and actually they trace the origins of that to Gallo first saying it came from an Asian monkey. Then he just kind of switched the story to Africa.
Oh my goodness.
But you're right. They have these stories about kids playing with dead monkeys. I don't know. Maybe some kids played with dead monkeys somewhere. You look at what they're saying about they were eating monkeys. They were storing them too long in their overheated huts in the jungle.
Right.
Well, you store a dead monkey in an overheated, jungle hut. The fact that you would even eat that says volumes about either what people think of you or, how hungry you really are. Because I don't think they would be storing a dead monkey it just makes no sense.
The country people are actually very intelligent, and just because they're poor and they have no resources doesn't mean they're savages. And I'm willing to bet serious money nobody ever hung a dead monkey in their hut for months and then decided to eat it later. It's these kind of stories that you'd make up. Another one of the stories that they recount, which is just preposterous, is they say, well, AIDS might have made it to the United States via from Africa via Haiti. And we heard a story about there was a bordello in Haiti that they had an African monkey as a pet. And I'm like, what? What?
This one little place in Haiti, which is an absolute hellhole.
Yeah.
They're saying we've narrowed it down to this one little place that has a pet monkey.
Which by the way, they got from Africa, right? Which is ludicrous.
And you know why Haiti has so much contact with Africa? Because they're black.
Right. Exactly.
No. Why would they have more contact with Africa than with, say, South America? I don't think. I don't know. What are the relations between Haiti and certain countries in Africa? I would say it's probably no bigger than their relationship with us or England or anywhere else.
It's probably less. It's probably less because there's no Haitians going to Senegal or Gambia to work.
Right.
Why would you do that? But you would go to the United States or Europe to get a job. So yeah, the whole thing. So they make up these crazy, and yet people buy them. People accept these stories because of the there is some underlying racist stupidity, thinking I guess Africans do crazy stuff like that. Well, actually they don't. Africans.
Well, I don't think that we have a racist stupidity. I think we have an unconscious, like I said, ritualistic fear of the other.
Okay, fair enough.
That's where that comes from. And racism is only a fear of contamination. That's all it is. It's the blood libel. Mm-hmm. It's saying, I don't want you to mix your blood with my blood. And, if you don't have that, you don't have racism. There's just, you can't make it work because it doesn't have a strong emotional, primal pull to it. So, the list goes on and on, the ridiculous things, even with the COVID thing, which, the bat soup to begin with,
right.
The wet market, and there's so many assumptions made along the way with that story that somehow it landed here and that's what your grandma died of in the nursing home. It's just so crazy. I do believe that they manufactured something, but why would they have to even release it if they could just take existing flu deaths and slap the COVID label on them?
Exactly.
And it's just really hard, I imagine, to manufacture a virus that gets into people, let alone knowing that that's not how viruses work, that they are actually things that are excreted by the cells when they're under stress. So you can't just pump a virus into somebody and expect them to get sick. It's a strange story, and it's meant to keep that superstition about viruses going. But if they did manufacture a virus, just like if they did manufacture HIV, there's that little conspiracy theory going around the world that's a crazy one. I'm a conspiracy theorist. I know that conspiracies exist, and I have theories about them, and that's how I run myself. I don't know. I have theories. So, but there's this crazy one that they just, contaminated polio vaccines with it, or dropped it on people from helicopters in Africa. Well, that would change the story about the monkeys a little bit, don't you think? But these conspiracies that they can just create a virus in a lab, and then voila, that's what caused a pandemic, when you don't even have a test for that in people.
Right.
All you're finding is antibodies that could be antibodies to anything, or using PCR technology, a piece of genetic fragment that could be from anything. So why would they bother to create this thing? Because obviously there's lots of evidence they created something. Oh, so that they can build a vaccine. You have to have something to build a vaccine off of.
Right. Well, there was I don't have the guy's name handy, but he's a physician, very bright guy, and he's very knowledgeable about all this stuff. And he said, if this was an invented vaccine, they're not very good at creating bioweapons.
You have nothing to worry about.
Yeah. No. Yeah. And by the way, he's all in on this is the result of hydrogen cyanide gas, which is a industrial gas product that is in high concentration in the air in Wuhan, and probably was also in high concentration in other urban areas, and that it actually creates the very symptoms that have been ascribed to certain COVID patients.
And it's horrible. If you listen to Dr. Kyle Siddell, who came out about, was it Elmhurst Hospital in Queens, or no, it was Maimonides in Brooklyn, that ventilators are not the way to treat hypoxia, which is what this is. Hypoxia is not a lung condition or a pneumonia. It is an inability to absorb oxygen. It's similar to the bends if you're a diver and you surface too fast. So that's why we have these newsreels of people collapsing on the streets of Chinese cities. It's horrible stuff. And then they turn on the 5G towers in the middle of all that. Obviously, there's a problem with some technology that they don't want to own up to. And this is another thing that they did with COVID, that they've done with AIDS, is whatever problem is out there that we don't want to own up to, we will blame a virus. We will blame this one. And so they talk a lot about the miners in South Africa, who are all black, by the way. And we all know, as white people, that black people have more sex than white people. Like, how do we know that? Right. We don't know that.
Exactly.
I always joke that it's because they have sexier music than we have.
Right.
We just don't have a Barry White over on our side. So, they have this story about the miners who are, away from their families in these mining camps. And if they get sick, it isn't because of the conditions in the mines. It's because they have been having sex with prostitutes who spread nasty germs in these places. Okay, well, that may be happening, but, they might get a little herpes or something, but I don't see why, if they get black lung, that's called AIDS, right? That's called being in a mine.
Right. And
so the companies that hire these people that do not provide the necessary medical care or working conditions for them to be healthy, they get off scot-free. They don't even have to provide anything. I imagine they get funds from UNAIDS and the Clinton Foundation and all these things to just pretend they're treating them for AIDS.
Wow. They get to call the problem AIDS and forget about ventilation, forget about wow.
And it's all these people's fault. They're just ignorant, black miners. Nobody cares about the Africans. Nobody really.
No.
It's very, very sad.
Well, the ignorance about, first of all, even just to say Africans, it's a huge place with all kinds of different people, different languages, different cultures, different material cultures, different levels of sophistication, and so the fact that we sort of lump them all together, and we just don't have any genuine curiosity and interest in the specifics of what
Yeah.
it is to be someone from Africa. And if we, it's like saying, well, he's a European. Well, let's say he lives in Scotland, and then you're comparing to a guy that lives in Sicily. These are two different planets,
Yeah. Very different cultures.
Yeah, yeah. So yes, theoretically they're Europeans, but once you get to the particulars, completely different. So
Yeah.
so where do we go from here? So we know that there's a lot of they take a real world problem and then overlay it with a virtual problem, a fantasy problem of their own creation that they can economically control through
Right.
endless bullshit.
Right. And here's the question: who are they?
Good question.
People are like, excuse me, I'll be speaking to somebody and somebody in the back row goes, who are they? And they think they just nailed me for being a crazy conspiracy theorist because I used a pronoun, right? There are theys, okay? And sometimes it's pretty obvious who I'm talking about, like the CDC or, this particular AIDS science. But it's really interesting if we're going to talk about Fauci to talk about who they are. Because nobody knows who they are, or we have a vague idea, if we've studied enough of this, that Fauci isn't the boss. He's the employee.
Mm-hmm.
He's just a very skilled employee. And by the way, he is 80 years old this year.
Yeah,
I mean, they can't get rid of this guy. They don't want to get rid of this guy. He's the continuity. He's the continuity of government plan. He's the bureaucrat that keeps it all going the same way it always did. And, people have made a big deal about the Judy Mikovits interviews and everything, and I'm not saying she was wrong or that she was lying, but, this is focusing on one guy instead of the larger problem, which we have just been talking about, which is serious. This could happen to you. This isn't just happening to Africans who, live in the jungle or work in mines. This is happening to us now. It has reached our shores. So people will have to rethink how they view this scientific landscape and who it really serves, because it definitely isn't going to serve you. And, the hashtag Fire Fauci is just getting at the tip of the iceberg.
Gotcha. And let's drill down on that, because that really is the issue. The AIDS scam targeted male homosexuals, targeted Africans, targeted Afro-Americans. It targeted people that were disenfranchised and did not have a lot of political power and did not have a lot of protections. And so
they can't hire lawyers, or at least they are perceived as not having the money to hire lawyers. I've known of a few cases where they have hired lawyers, and boy, were people surprised.
And let's talk about specifically. Now we've mentioned a little bit about Africa, how they'll swoop down on a village and declare that everybody has AIDS, and now everybody's got to take the magical antiretrovirals that are all carcinogenic. That's one obvious method of exploiting people. They've done the same thing largely to African American families, but I think any family of limited means that falls prey to these people. So that's an example of people being victimized by this. But you were also mentioning before we started recording that they perfected a method for turning, quote, AIDS patients into cash cows for hospitals, for nursing homes, for institutions. Yes. It might be worthwhile to talk about that, because it's the money that keeps this. It's the money that's the huge motivation for all this, and the money that keeps this thing going, because so many people's bread is being buttered by this scam.
Yeah, it speaks to a personal experience that I had trying to help one friend. And he was in his 60s. He had survived 25 years without getting sick. In fact, he was healthier than most people I know. He had just gotten an AIDS test in like 1991 or something, an HIV test, just because he said he couldn't have sex if he didn't have his little, check off that little box. And he did not realize that this would come to visit him later. When he was indeed sick, he had a neurological problem. He collapsed. He collapsed many times. His roommate finally had him sent to the hospital. And you know that they don't let you stay in the hospital for months and months. They send you to a rehab, which are generally pretty pleasant places. I mean, they're nursing homes basically, but you're only supposed to be there temporarily. He chose the one that was supposed to be paid for by Medicare, Medicaid, because the social worker at the New York hospital told his roommate that it would be paid. And lo and behold, it wasn't. In the meantime, he was transferred from the rehab floor to the HIV positive floor. And at that point, you don't get out of there because you are a cash cow. You never get cured of HIV, all right? Because there's just bogus tests anyway. They'll just keep saying you have it. You never emerge from there. And they can just keep you there by not giving you proper services. So I witnessed this, and it was mostly people who just didn't have the knowledge or the legal resources to fight this.
So this was a guy, just to go back over this, he had a legitimate, definite health problem, but he also had taken at some point one of these bogus AIDS tests, and they had found him to be, quote, positive. So they just said, oh, well, your problems must be related to AIDS. You're an AIDS patient.
Right. No matter what you have. You talked about that list of 29 things. No, they'll just say whatever you have.
And then
it's AIDS.
And then there's a whole rack of money that's been made available based on really politics, really, that if you've got AIDS, you're suddenly someone who can tap into this huge pool of money. One of the things I saw in some of the documentaries that I was watching, I don't know if this is still the case, where you would have on a just a simple level, you'd have a guy that was perfectly healthy, but he had an positive AIDS test, and so he was able to get free rent and free this and free that, and as a result of all these funds that had been created, and the guy was actually healthy, but he happened to just show positive on this bogus test. That's probably the least sinister, but I guess ultimately it ends up in a very sinister place, because if you develop a real health problem, they attribute it to AIDS, and all of a sudden they're pumping you with AIDS drugs, which are murderous.
You guys out there, don't get too confident that you know how this system works, because you could end up in this place. Yes.
Well, you know what? Let's bring that into focus. So we've seen this happen to male homosexuals. We've seen this happen to disenfranchised people in the United States. We've seen this happen to Africans, where someone rolls into town, gives you a test, and all of a sudden you've got AIDS. And now, and then there were people that were being pressured, right? Weren't there people pressured to give their children antiretrovirals and
Oh yes, absolutely. And many of these children are being raised by their grandmothers or aunts and uncles in these poorer neighborhoods of big cities like New York. And some of them are educated, some of them are not very educated. And, they're already kind of at the end of what they can handle, just raising their children's children, because their children have gotten off on drugs or something and they're in jail, things like that. This happens. I worked in an elementary school in Brooklyn, and fully a third of the kids were like living with their grandparents or something. So, you have this situation, and then the grandmother is, they discover the kid is HIV positive, obviously, because they have the immune system of their crack mother, crack addicted mother. They were tested before 18 months, and that's not a valid test, and they're doing fine, but they give them these drugs. And then the grandmother will discover that, what if I took them off it? Would they thrive better? Take them to the pediatrician, report that, that drug wasn't working very well. He's actually doing better on it, and then get reported to, Child Protective Services, which in New York is called ACS. And, and from there it's a nightmare. I mean, you get your kids taken away from you. I mean, they were literally coming for kids in the middle of the night and beating down doors. to go to foster care or an orphanage called Incarnation Children's Center, and then they were testing drugs on these kids.
Unbelievable. And
Yeah.
all this, was dealt with after World War II in the Nuremberg trials, and a whole code of conduct was.
Oh, it wasn't the Nuremberg trials; it's the Nuremberg Code.
Nuremberg Code. Okay.
Yeah, and that was never ratified by the United States. There's something else, another like a Helsinki or something, I forget, that's associated with that. That's actually the thing that you ratify. And the United States never ratified that.
They never ratified the alternative code?
Yeah, or whatever it is that enforces the Nuremberg principles.
Wow, because the principles are really clear. You don't. First of all, and this is really interesting. This applies to AIDS and it applies to COVID. You don't do experimentation ever unless you already understand the science behind what you're doing. And since there's no science behind AIDS and there's no real science behind COVID, any experimentation, whether with treatments or vaccines, is bogus and a violation of human rights just on the face of it.
Well, yeah. They can't even prove that you're sick.
And then I think another part of it too is you've got to fully disclose the risks that people are taking when they become guinea pigs for these drugs, and that's not being done. By the way, you probably.
Well, obviously, it's not being done in the case of a 2-year-old.
Right.
And their guardian is forced to sign off on it because, in place of informed consent, they just say, this kid has a serious disease. They have HIV. Unless you sign this, they won't get free medical care.
Wow.
And, they don't know any better. And for a while before that, they were just blanket approving the kids. The only thing that they changed because of the Incarnation Children's Center scandal in 2004 or 2005, the only thing that they changed in New York City was that blanket approval. Now they actually have to get some relative to sign off on it. But that's easy.
Yeah, it's just an extra step.
Yeah, you just tell them your kid has AIDS.
So they were basically taking, before this scandal broke, they were basically using Child Protective Services to take kids, put them in this home, and then use them as guinea pigs for AIDS drugs testing or general drugs testing or...
AIDS testing.
AIDS testing.
Drug testing. And these are drugs like AZT. AZT itself that had long been proven to be toxic in adults. And, one of these kids was reported by Liam Sheff, who went undercover there, to be bleeding out of every orifice in his body before he died. I mean, this was the kind of horrid things that he saw. And, yeah, it was, and it may still be going on, except that I think that they are no longer running studies. I mean, they are still taking the kids if you're refusing to treat them for so-called AIDS. But I think that the testing has ended, and now they declared the tests to be victorious, that they somehow manipulated the statistics to show that, these kids had slightly better cognitive abilities just before they died, some horrible thing. And so now the drugs are approved, they're FDA approved, and they are the standard of care, and that's what they're doing with these kids.
Incredible. I mean, I even saw a story where a mother was nationally chastised for refusing to give her child Tamiflu. So this is happening, and now here we are in the age of COVID, where it's starting to look like. I mean, for instance, this is unbelievable. I can hardly believe that they're going to get away with it, but maybe they are. They're telling students at Harvard, well, you have two choices. You can pay us the full amount and get a watered-down, crappy online version of Harvard, or if you insist on coming to campus, we'll handle you. You got to have a COVID test every 3 days.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, if it reaches Harvard's hallowed shores, these are not children of the, the Skid Row.
Right.
These are comfortably middle-class families. That tells you something. This is coming for you. Okay? It's time to wake up, and it's time to stop, participating in the cotton candy factory that says that we're, support our healthcare workers, and we need to all get tested, and just act like such a babe in the woods, such a naive this is coming for you, and this is not good. Now, I think that what will happen, and it's going to be very, very scary, is that come school, okay, September, day after Labor Day, most places, they're not going to let kids in unless they get this vaccine.
Right.
So many kids will get this vaccine, and many kids will fall ill. And I think that is where the line gets drawn. It will take the deaths and disability of many children to wake people up, because unless it happens in your family, you're not concerned. I tried to show Vax 2 in this town. Now, it had already shown a couple months earlier or 4 months earlier. It was fine. I would think that more people would be interested then. I couldn't get anybody to sign up after COVID happened, and of course they canceled it anyway, a month later, because you can't sit in a movie theater. But these are families telling their stories. And there was even a whole cinema chain that refused to show it.
Oh, yeah.
Why would you refuse to show a film that has credible stories by families about vaccine damage to their kids? If you want to oppose that kind of thing, you need to sit your butt in a chair in that cinema, watch the movie, take some notes, and see what points you can refute. Okay? Let's get to it.
Well,
tell me why these families are wrong.
The Tribeca Film Festival, when Vaxxed 1 came out, the original film, it was scheduled. Everybody was happy about it, and next thing you know, it's canceled. And the amazing thing is Robert De Niro, who, from what I understand, has a vaccine-injured son. He wasn't happy about it, but went along with it, went along with the banning of the film.
Yeah, and then he reversed his position, and then he went back again. I asked Del Bigtree about that. I do slightly know Del.
Yeah.
And he said, I said, what's the deal with Robert De Niro? And he says, all those tough guy films, his tough guy roles?
Yeah.
I said, yeah. Said he's the opposite of that.
Uh-huh.
Okay? That's who the actor is. And now I believe that, I think it's more than a rumor that he was picked up on child pornography charges or pedophilia charges in Europe. And
really?
De Niro is pretty much off the scene. Yeah. I think he made that one film, The Irishman. I think that's going to be the last one.
Well, and they can always, what's so frightening with all these electronic devices, if they want to get you, I'm sure they could put those things on somebody's phone or their computer, and then, unless you have a super duper forensic expert, it's one way to get people. I mean, I know that Alex.
That's what's happening.
Yeah.
That's what's happening right now. That is so interesting in this day and age, is that these people, whoever they are, the people at the very top, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, who fund everything that happens. Nothing happens without money. Let's get straight here. Okay? And the Chinese Communist Party, it happens because of the banksters. It's not communist. It's communist, but it's not like, soft communism where everybody gets to eat. It's so they want total control. It's obvious by now. This isn't a crazy conspiracy theory at this point. They are seeking to monitor us in all ways and to put a chip in us so that we will be more monitored. The thing they didn't count on was that the elite class was being monitored as well. So, you got things like the Wiener laptop showing up.
Right.
Or,
Epstein.
Hillary Clinton's private server, right?
Right.
And Epstein, gosh, that wasn't even high tech. That was just getting a hold of the flight logs all written out.
Yeah.
So, you can bust people now, and to say, oh, we just don't know if he's guilty or not. Yeah, you do.
Yeah.
All you have to do, excuse me, the FBI can't get a hold of this. Why don't you just go down the street to the NSA or how about Google? Yeah, why don't you just go there? If you failed to collect this evidence. So, it's a little off topic, but I think it's not. I think that the manufacturing of fake epidemics is the most promising way to get people to surrender their rights. Because, if you can just say, because everybody's going to die if you go outside, we have to suspend your constitutional rights. Everybody goes, oh, yeah, you know what? We're too stupid to understand, so we will trust the experts. And then you trot out somebody like Anthony Fauci, who stands up there and he's the expert, right? Only somebody just shot him down as an expert on anything, and he's making ridiculous statements. So this whole thing is falling in on itself. So I'm very optimistic for the future that we will get a handle on this. All your worst harassers on Facebook will get sobered up by September, October, when they start coming for their kids and grandkids. And you're home with those kids and you're seeing that they're developing horrible diseases like autism. You will finally get it. I don't know what else is going to make people believe. I'm done. I have no more propaganda tricks to use on people.
Right.
Just tell them. And you can't, and Joseph Goebbels himself said you can't use intellect to get to people. If you own their emotions, then nobody can talk intellect to them. I liken it to a different radio station. I'm talking about, I'm talking PBS, I'm talking NPR, right? I'm all, ducks in a row with all my facts, been studying this for 27 years, and somebody says, yeah, but, 800 AM CKLW, right? In the Motor City, right? The Motor City. Let's listen to some more bubblegum rock. What? I can't hear you. I'm too busy listening to commercials about, the latest hairspray. So we're not talking the same conversation anymore. And this came about with AIDS.
I'm hoping that you're right. I
hope I'm wrong, actually. That these kids don't get,
it's a terrible cost. But I have a terrible alternative projection, which is, they've done a very good job of shutting down discussion on vaccine and vaccine injury. In fact, people have such amazing amnesia. It was only last year that, where there was a vaccine mania, that every kid had to get a measles vaccine. And right here in the area where I live, one of the counties tried to float a law that if you were an unvaccinated child, you had to be on permanent quarantine and permanent curfew. Forget school. This is Rockland County.
Rockland County, New York.
Rockland County, New York, which for people that don't know the geography is, one county away from Manhattan, or Westchester.
Maybe two.
Yeah,
maybe
but pretty darn close. The county executive's an ex-cop, so he's not a scientist, and he's definitely a law and order man. And his dictum, which luckily was shot down, and that by the way, courts. We're going to talk about that in a second. The court shot that down. They said you cannot force children to stay in their homes 24/7.
Oh, I do recall that. Yes.
Yeah.
And they were kind of targeting there or elsewhere the Orthodox Jewish population.
Right.
Yeah.
But they were hitting everybody, everybody that didn't go along, because they were such a danger to society and humanity.
Right. And that went over like a lead balloon.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And then
But they'll keep trying in different ways. It's just, oh, well, we didn't win this one. We'll do it a different way.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. But they have done a good job of shutting down discussion, of the vaccine issue. I know there are a lot of people that are aware of the dangers and are active and are outspoken, but there's a lot of forces lined up against them to, stamp them down and shut them up. A lot of, for instance, a lot of Facebook pages, and when I say a Facebook page, I don't just mean a page, I mean some group that might have 20, 30, 50, 100,000 members were just turned off in the last 12 months. And so I'm hoping...
I have a different perspective on the censorship.
Okay.
They wouldn't have to do this if it wasn't a danger.
Oh, good point.
If we weren't so awake, they wouldn't have to put us to sleep.
Okay.
Right? People are, a bigger majority than you think, are awake. It's just we're not given a platform.
Yeah.
But, and the people who agree with all this stuff going on, they never experience any kind of censorship. So they think, oh, well, I must be in the majority. No, they're not. You don't get to just take my kids because, just because. No,
Yeah.
that won't happen. And they will protest that as well. So I'm seeing some people change minds. I'm seeing others just, dig in. And, again, it's like the Tony Fauci science by bureaucracy, that you don't have to prove anything. And here in Michigan, the governor, okay, so if she's got a real emergency on her hand and a state of emergency has been declared and it's been declared by the courts to still be valid, she can still put out laws in the form of executive orders, which is a breakdown of the separation of powers. So what she does is she says, oh, I have all this data and all these numbers, but people ask for the source of those numbers and the source of that data.
Mm-hmm.
Heck, I'd like to write her a letter and subpoena, what are your testing procedures? Because there's only two possible ones and they're both just nonsense. They're both garbage. And she doesn't have to declare any of that. She's like, oh, it's in my files. It's fine. The legislature, they're up in arms. They want the data that this is based on, and she won't give it to them. And so I saw long ago that if you can manipulate science or the perception of it, if you can manipulate reality itself as perceived by people,
Mm-hmm.
then you have all the power in the world. So that's the danger of having, as Terry Michael said, the cult of Tony, this cool guy with a basketball net in his office. And, he's fighting diseases and he's doing nothing of the sort. He's supporting the big pharma. He has this big science establishment behind him, and nobody gets funding without it, pretty much approved by the policies of this man. And, it came up with the whole Judy Mikovits thing, which, by the way, she was an AIDS researcher, so I never got past the first 15 minutes of Plandemic,
Right.
with her talking about how he somehow delayed the announcement in 1984 that they found the virus. So I assume she worked for the French team. I'm not sure, but she's a victim of the very system that she's a part of. But all this stuff about him and how he made her go to jail and all this, like, he doesn't fool around. But this is bigger fish to fry than that.
Well, it's a view.
Yeah.
It's a and it's something I've been thinking about, and I'm sure you agree. It's really the fundamental issue of what is health. How do we view health? And you talked about it. Health is not the 2 pills or 20 pills that pharma has decided you need. Health is a completely different animal. Maybe you could talk a little about your current work, and you've been through this
Sure.
you've been through this dark world, and you've excavated it. I mean, you found.
I'm back in Michigan, where I came from,
Yeah.
small town on the east coast of Michigan. If I could just continue that thought, where
please,
I was going
please.
with that was, all this hysteria, everybody piling on one guy. Not that I think he doesn't deserve it; he deserves whatever, but it didn't serve us, because it was all, hashtag fire Fauci, hashtag arrest Fauci. And he may actually have been arrested. I mean, I think he's under quarantine, and that's code for house arrest in the circles I talk to.
Really?
But that's, yeah. But, nobody really knows. Again, it's a theory. It's not, it's not, I don't have total evidence of that. But he may already be arrested. But the thing is, to arrest someone in this country, you have to actually prove that they broke a law. And one of the beautiful points of that interview that we did with Terry Michael was, and the point kind of went by pretty fast, about when he was taking all those honorariums from universities and stuff, 50,000 here, $500,000 there, whatever,
Yep.
and it wasn't considered a bribe. He said, yeah, according to the law and the regulations right now, you can get away with that.
Yep.
That's legal. So much of probably all of what Fauci has done, up until I would argue recently, is legal. There's no reason to go after this guy. Now I believe there is, because it came out in what was it, April or something, pretty early on in this thing, that the Surgeon General announced that they were no longer, the government, the Trump administration was no longer going to use the mathematical models. They don't count things; they just do models, right? That's how they, trump up the statistics.
Yeah.
That they were no longer going to use these models from, like, Fauci's organization or the CDC or the WHO. They were going to use the government's own data. Here I was thinking they were using the government's own data. I mean, that was the president standing up there. I had only just learned that moment that they were using some models that, Fauci basically pulled out of his butt. And that is called falsifying data.
Ooh.
If they're no longer using that data, then that means they don't trust that data, and it could be false. Could have been made up to benefit certain people. So if there's an investigation behind the scenes of that happening, then I think Fauci was set up to go before all the cameras every day, twice a day, some days, and announce all this stuff and tell the whole American population you have to, stay inside, and then to find out it was on false data. Okay, so you could probably get, 20,000 people to sign a petition to arrest Fauci because of what he did to Judy Mikovits.
Mm-hmm.
And it wouldn't go through because the FBI and the district attorney can't put together a case according to the law. But with this, you might have a case. And he may actually be, operating under some plea deal. That's the conspiracy theory going around, okay?
That's interesting.
I don't think it's wrong to have a conspiracy theory going around. Doesn't mean it's true. It means you keep an eye on that, okay? So, but, just getting back to health, let's talk about health.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So, the whole AIDS thing, the whole COVID thing has gotten everybody persuaded that they're, A, incredibly vulnerable, B, there's nothing they can do, and C, we have to wait around for somebody to come up with a cure or a vaccine, and then once they come up with it, we have to run to it and take it. What a bizarro view of health, and yet that's what they have engineered in the public mind.
Right, and it's very hard to fight that legally because you have to go to court, you have to have experts at $400 an hour, and the government or whoever is running that government or that agency will come up with their experts at $800 an hour. I mean, it's just whatever anybody can prove in court. It would be tied up for years. That's the danger of science by bureaucracy, that reality and real science and the things that affect you, you don't get a say in. It's all decided above your head. And so if you surrender to that, you might as well just consider yourself, on the fast track to death. It's not a good way to go, in my opinion. And although you may think that interview we did in 2014 was epic, I mean, I think this one is even more epic because we're forcing people to listen to this is happening to you, not just somebody in Africa or in that neighborhood over there. And this, you have a choice. There's a fork in the road. You can go that path of wearing your mask to the grocery store and thinking you're protecting yourself or others from a virus that's going to land on them and kill them. And it's all about, building a fortress around you to protect your so-called health. Or you're going to take the other fork in the road, which is you're just going to be healthy. There isn't a virus that can harm you ever. It's a done deal. You know where you are. Now, there are parasites and bacteria and funguses that can come from outside, and they can attack you. And if you have not good immunity, you need to watch out for those. But viral science is not as subtle as people think. And this isn't about some dweeby guy at the NIH cheating you out of health, because you have to claim your own power to do that. And that's what I've always been about in this AIDS thing. I don't have to sell this to people. They're like, no, sell it to me. Tell me why I should do this, why I should just tell my doctor that I don't want to do this anymore. Well, I don't have to tell you why. You either want to go out and play and have fun and have a life, or you don't.
Mm-hmm.
And having a life means you are in charge of your own health. And, I have not always been the most healthy person myself. I'm fighting some illnesses right now. So, some mysterious things going on, some inability to sleep. That's part of my body adapting to an environment that is not right for it in some ways. I honor that process. I seek expert help. I've got an appointment tomorrow with a chiropractor who has some skills beyond chiropractic. Imagine that. Oh, that's terrible. You need a real doctor. Yeah, he's a real doctor in my estimation. I make these decisions. It's not up to him to save me. It's up to me to save me. And if I don't like what he says, if I don't get enough from it, I can go down the street to somebody else. So, these little a-holes, they ruin your life. And they do it through fear. And fear is only a product of a lack of knowledge. So if you have a lack of self-confidence in your ability to figure things out scientifically, to comprehend them fully, then you will fall back on reliance on experts like Fauci, who are not clean. They have conflicts of interest all over the place. If you want to hand your life over to that kind of corrupted information, you can do that. People have put up whole websites to argue against Elizabeth Ely telling them what to do. I didn't tell you what to do. You decide if you want to own your life or you want somebody else to own it. So if you want to abdicate your birthright, self-determination and health, all that wholeness, that sovereignty, and that integrity, there are plenty of places that will help you do that, and they will take your money, and they will take Medicaid and Medicare, okay? But, that's why AIDS, those ads on the subway, they all show a cheap, fake rebelliousness, people being hugged from behind. There's approval by others. There's a one on TV of a guy who gets to speak in front of people. He's a black dude with dreads, and he's got this white girl who just thinks he's so cool, and she's got, piercings all over. And, it's like, well, so what? Like, so how do you feel about yourself? He's getting a standing ovation for people. There's no self in the center of that. And I remember there was a short story by Susan Sontag in the New Yorker magazine in 1986, in the beginning of all this, called The Way We Live Now. And it was just, he's got this problem, said Trina. Oh, yes, said Bill. We need to do something about that. Yeah, but he's not eating very well, said Bill. And, it's everyone talking about this person who is so tragically dying of AIDS. And he's the empty center of attention without a real voice of his own. He's adored for being nobody, for being nothing, and for leaving the game of his own life to others. So, I could even, quote to you. You want to hear this?
Sure, yeah, totally.
And the picture, it's perfect. It's all these people walking. You can see the backs of their heads. So it's a crowd of people. It's a painting of a crowd of people walking, and there's another person in the middle, bigger than them, and he's just a silhouette in white. At first, he was just losing weight. He felt only a little ill, Max said to Ellen, and he didn't call for an appointment with his doctor, according to Greg, because he was managing to keep on working at more or less the same rhythm. But he did stop smoking, Tanya pointed out, which suggests he was frightened, but also that he wanted even more than he knew, to be healthy or healthier, or maybe just to gain back a few pounds, said Orson. For he told her, Tanya went on, that he expected to be climbing the walls, isn't that what people say, and found, to his surprise, that he didn't miss cigarettes at all and reveled in the sensation of his lungs being ache-free for the first time in years. But he did have a good doctor, Stephen wanted to know. Oh, but did he have a good doctor, Stephen wanted to know, since it would have been crazy not to go for a checkup after the pressure was off and he was back from the conference in Helsinki, even if by then he was feeling better. And he said to Frank that he would go, even though he was indeed frightened, as he admitted to Jan. But who wouldn't be frightened now, though, odd as that might seem? He hadn't been worrying until recently, he avowed to Quentin. It was only in the last 6 months that he had the metallic taste of panic in his mouth, because becoming seriously ill was something that happened to other people, a normal delusion, he observed to Paolo. If one was 38 and never had a serious illness, he wasn't, as Jan confirmed, a hypochondriac. Of course, it was hard not to worry. Everyone was worried, but it wouldn't do to panic because, as Max pointed out to Quentin, there wasn't anything one could do except wait and hope. Wait and start being careful. Be careful and hope. And even if one did prove to be ill, one shouldn't give up. They had new treatments that promised an arrest of the disease's inexorable course. Research was progressing. It seemed that everyone was in touch with everyone else several times a week, checking in. I've never spent so many hours at a time on the phone, Stephen said to Kate. And when I'm exhausted after the 2 or 3 calls made to me, giving the latest instead of switching off the phone to give myself a respite, I tap out the number of another friend or acquaintance to pass on the news. I'm not sure I can afford to think so much about it, Ellen said. And I suspect my own motives. There's something morbid I'm getting used to, getting excited by. This must be what people felt in. This must be like what people felt in London during the Blitz. I mean, you can go on and on and on.
Wow.
With this stuff. I mean, just the whole vibe of that thing. This was written by Susan Sontag, by the way, who died of breast cancer like 10 years ago or something.
Wow.
I mean, what about that? I mean, does that strike you?
I mean, it's a culture of wallowing in victimhood and sickness and, lack of personal power. And that's what I'm getting from it. I don't know what other people are hearing when they hear it.
Yeah.
And making
and
an
how
art
can health ever come from that?
And making an art form out of it.
Yeah,
like glorifying it, elevating this and it's sort of spit in the eye of creation. And the way I always look at this stuff is like, we are all the products of countless generations of human beings who survived all the way to get us going. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
well, I have to say that my grandmother was a survivor of 2 parents who died of tuberculosis in the old country in Bulgaria.
wow.
And yeah, there were ways that people died. Yes. Things were not always wonderful.
But humanity survived, and a whole lot of and that's the other thing too about this is like, do people get that no doctor, no drug, no pharmaceutical company, no breakthrough is going to change the fundamental fact that we're all going to die? Like, I really have this feeling that somewhere in the back of people's minds, if they feel like if we just obey, if we just do what we're told, that these people are going to protect us. Well, you know what I mean? Like, there is no doctor who, when you get to the end of your life is going to be able to stop that natural process. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, you will die when you do one thing, when you stop breathing.
Yeah.
And at some point, it will look like a good idea to stop breathing. I'm not saying it will be a fun time, but, nobody gets out of here alive. But
yeah.
Life is meant to be lived. It's meant, it has a force to it. And you don't get that force from wearing a mask and protecting yourself from something. Yeah, I mean, by all means, don't be, eating tainted chicken or going through the drive-through of McDonald's not knowing what's in that stuff. But, like every little thing, it's become a risk-averse society. Instead of living, avoiding death. And Celia Farber and I had a very good interview as part of that series at howpositiveareyou.com, and people should know to go there to see our the podcasts that I and David with several other people, among them Celia, and among them Terry Michael as co-hosts. Those were 2 of his co-hosts recorded. There was one that I recorded with Celia Farber in July of 2016, just before I left New York, and she left New York for a while then too. And it was about Julian Assange, basically, and she had gone to the actual police reports in Sweden because she does speak Swedish.
Oh, yeah.
And just found out the allegations against him, the story behind these 2 women, the whole thing. And it was a story with a subtext of avoiding risk, avoiding danger, but not living. Mm-hmm. So you would actually if you were one of these girls, you would actually go home with this guy and have sex with him. But then you'd spend the rest of your life worrying if he infected you with something.
Right.
You know, and it was like this fake liberation going on, where in Sweden, you know, it's like sex is no big deal. But it's all fraught with fear now. And it's like feminism. And are you sure she said yes? Just because she left you in the apartment and, you know, took off her clothes, maybe not, you know. And we were talking basically about, rather than living, avoiding dying.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
And that's the whole story of disease nowadays. And I've often observed that the treatments for AIDS, I wondered why people were so hooked on them, that they were scared to go off them. And even if they knew they were killing them. And what I got was, it was a slow way to commit suicide. That rather than dealing with death as this uncontrollable, you could just get hit by a bus tomorrow, or, you know, get poisoned by bad chicken or something, you knew how slowly or how fast you were dying if you just meted it out in little doses. And you would measure it, you know, with viral load and T cells, which are meaningless measures. And you'd brag about it to your friends, you know, keep everybody updated, and you know, and then somebody like Beth would come along and say, you know, that's bullshit. I'm not buying that. You go, no. I mean, you'd just be thrown into total cognitive dissonance. Now you'd have to face actual death rather than the idea of it.
Right. And we should say that you worked with a lot of people in New York City who were caught in that web and wanted to get out of it, and you assisted people. And you talked to me once about this man who was very gifted in dehypnotizing people who believed they were doomed by a positive AIDS test, so-called AIDS test.
Yeah, it was kind of in the middle of my religious period. I was a devoted Methodist, liberal Methodist, and I went to Washington Square United Methodist Church, and, you know, we marched in things, and we did God's work by feeding his flock, and I really loved that. But I realized there was a problem, that there was no real hope or miracles there. It was all prayers to please save my great aunt from breast cancer and make sure the diagnosis comes out this way, as if you can just kind of sway nature, you know, by praying to God. And it was that zero sum, you know, please protect us, not, hey, we're going to live. And I went up the street. I had already been awakened by this a couple of years earlier, and I went up the street on a Wednesday night to Gay and Lesbian Center, something like 13th or 12th and 7th Avenue. And it was usually a standing room only, well, not only, but the chairs plus people standing around the back to hear Michael Ellner speak. Michael Ellner was a very gifted hypnotist, and he had given over much of his work to helping people who believed in this AIDS hoax to wake up. And he had taken over basically, or just been, you know, nominated, just thrown up there to be the leader of a group that had met actually for the last 10 years in the basement of that very church I was about to get thrown out of, as a gay potluck, where they just discussed, like, what's going on? Is this matching what we're seeing, what we're reading in the media versus and they found out that it never made any sense. So he joined that group. He wasn't gay. He started leading these meetings where he would dehypnotize the whole room. I still don't understand his technique. I know that he would start out by saying, much of what we are going to say here is going to be deeply upsetting to you. And about halfway through what he would say, his presentation, just sitting in a chair, I would look around me and I would see that people had a new energy about them, that they had woken up. Their faces, as I said, and I said, I'm gonna describe it this way forever. The sun coming up in their faces. And so I made it a habit to always sit almost next to Michael Ellner so that I could look into the crowd instead of look at him. And it never ceased to happen. It always happened. The other people running that, Tom DiFerdinando is still around, that just, they did the same thing. I asked them, did you have a technique or something? And Tom said, oh yeah, we had a technique. But it was basically just waking people up. And we don't realize that we are in a hypnosis already. We're afraid somebody's going to hypnotize us and make us do stuff. No, you're already there. As soon as you turn on the TV, that's kicking in. And it's the essence of living, to be free, to break yourself of the hypnosis around you and just say, no, I'm not going to wear that mask. What kind of ridiculousness is this? No, you can't take my child to immunize them against something that doesn't exist. I won't do that.
Right, and I'm not going to run and get tested for something that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Which was, by the way, we should, to tie these things together, COVID and AIDS, that was the big theme during the AIDS era, wasn't it? That everyone had to get tested.
Yeah, knowing is better than not knowing. Well, as soon as, you'll just keep getting tested until you get a positive result. And then you stop testing.
And then once you got a positive result, you talk about hypnosis, the whole I've got AIDS trance kicked in, and you were lost unless you worked your way out of it.
Right. Even if you weren't ill at that point, they would tell you, this kicks in about 10 years.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
It's a disease.
And I noticed that was actually true when I got to working with a lot of people on Facebook. I didn't work with a lot of people until I got on social media. And I became one of the admins of one of the big groups. Oh. And it was the Rethinking AIDS group, which got pulled in mid-2018. I learned, just talking to people. And they would be like, I was so confident, but now just the other day I got really sick. And it's been 9 years or it's been 11 years. It would be somewhere in that range. And I think that's just, maybe that idea was planted in them as a hypnosis, but I think that's just kind of the length of time that you can kid yourself when you, in your heart of hearts, really believe that you're sick. Yeah.
Well, you can induce. Well, there's many stories in so-called primitive societies. I think even.
That was Michael Ellner. He talked about bone.
Right. There you go. You go.
Yeah.
Someone would
His essay is in that book by John Lauritsen and Ian Young. I highly recommend it. Called The AIDS Cult. It's from 1996 or 7. Yeah.
Yeah, and that in this particular society, if the shaman pointed the bone of death at you, you were going to die. and
people would just up and die.
Yeah, and that's the power of the mind. So that's the power of the mind working to the negative, but it could also work. It also works for the positive. You can use your mind to keep yourself well.
Okay, so let's talk about Michael Ellner and my favorite personal story about Michael Ellner. Michael Ellner saved my life.
Wow.
And he did so in a very brutal manner. Okay. And I give myself credit for being the kind of person who can take brutality like that and consider it. Okay?
Okay.
Because he woke me up.
Okay.
I had thought that I had cervical cancer for 2.5 years. And I'd had exploratory surgeries. They were unable to find it again. As of August 2006. Then in August 2007, I got a call saying, oh, we got a problem again. You need to come in. Oh, isn't it great? We can even predict this stuff 10 years before it becomes a problem. I just kind of looked at the phone receiver and said, you want to predict 10 years in advance so I can live in fear for 10 years? Like, what? Wow. I had already been through the mill. This had cost me every cent I had. And I called up Michael. I said, I don't know what to do. I mean, AIDS doesn't exist, at least not as one thing. But cancer exists. I mean, I want to believe what you're saying, but I can't. Just empirically. You have to give me empirical evidence. And he was just angry as hell. And he just said, you know, you're an idiot, and you fall for all this stuff. I can't believe the likes of you would fall for this. You know, how long have I known you? And I said goodbye, and I cried. I went outside where I worked down by Wall Street, and I cried for a good 20 minutes. I felt so alone in that moment. It was like the low point of my life. I felt like I have no allies in the medical establishment, and I have no allies outside it in my so-called friends. They don't have my back. I went back to work, pulled myself together, worked for 5 hours. Finally, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, whatever, I get a call right at work from Michael Elner. And he said, I don't know what to tell you. I said, what do you mean? He says, well, I've been working at this for the last 5 hours. I've been researching this. And I'm good at this, he said. And I can't find any convincing data, like just little bits and pieces. Nothing really convincing about these biopsies, this Pap test, this, you know, the probability of it becoming a problem, a tumor that's going to kill you or spreading to other organs. There's just nothing. And I said, oh my God. I said, then I guess this is over. He said, yeah, it is. And I started crying. I said, Michael, I love you. And at that moment, I walked away from a possible cancer diagnosis. And that was 13 years ago.
Wow.
And so if you can do that, you have real power in this world that nobody can just say, you know, well, you're going to die because you didn't listen to us. Okay, maybe I will die. I know also that if I find out I have cancer again, or there's some test, I'll ask for the parameters of the test first. But if I figure, you know, I've got some cancer cells hanging out, I don't think that's a good idea. I already have the anti-cancer lifestyle in place, and I have connections all over the world to experts. I can connect other people to those experts. In fact, I do in the work that I do today. I think I'm good. And to be the one person walking down a New York City street in absolute conviction that I'm not going to die of cancer is a feeling of power I cannot describe to you. And to be at that level of power, I don't have to sell this to you. I don't have to tell you don't listen to those people. So what I do today in Michigan, in southeast Michigan, is I live in a small city, the one that I grew up in, and I run an organization of holistic health care people, massage therapists, acupuncturists. So surprisingly, we have less than 30,000 people in this particular town. We're kind of connected to some others, but we're very well supplied with these practitioners and genius people, and yet very few people know about them. They learn about them through word of mouth. If they're lucky, their doctor will be hip to something. They just go to their doctor. And I wanted people to know, and I'm an information person, I'm a journalist, I wanted them to know that this is available. So my members are also general public who just want to get involved in knowing. And I do private one-on-one sessions for people. I do consulting work, not in giving medical advice. It's educational work. It's journalism saying, okay, I've heard of this, that, and the other thing that people are doing for this. And here are some experts, some licensed medical doctors, osteopaths, chiropractors, nutritionists who, you know, have had a good track record at, say, thyroid problems, and have you considered that your weight problem is a thyroid problem? Like I did one consultation with a woman on weight problems. We didn't talk about weight problems the whole time. Okay? So I do that now because I've been in the trenches, because I've had illnesses that have led me to question things. And it breaks my heart to know that there were these men in the late 70s and early 80s that had these illnesses, and they presented at these doctors, and the doctors had no answer until suddenly they had an answer, and it was, this is a virus and you're going to die.
Right.
They had no alternatives. They had nobody telling them, you know what, you might not take those antibiotics long term. That's dangerous. And you might shore up your microbiome. Nobody knew what a microbiome was then.
Right.
Out in the general public. knowledge is what's going to empower people. So I provide these sessions. This is my shameless self-promotion moment, so I'll take it.
Take it, yeah.
Yeah, I provide consultations over Skype, over Zoom, over the phone, in person. And if anybody wants to do that, they can contact me at elizabeth.ely.nyc, as in New York City, at gmail.com. And I accept no harassment emails. Thank you very much. You will be put into the spam folder. This isn't constructive, and I think if you want to have a healthier life, you'll get out of that kind of behavior. So I feel like I've earned the knowledge, and I'm always learning, and I love doing what I do. So health is everyone's birthright. Go for it. Keep trying.
And you're part of nature, and nature's resilient, and that means you're resilient.
That's right.
That means you're resilient too.
Right. God don't make no junk.
Yeah.
Right.
And these sorcerers who want to tell you a different story are just bullshit artists, really. That they don't even have science on their side.
Yeah. They just have bureaucracy and some guy named Fauci who looks pretty good in front of a podium. He can barely peer up over it. He's so short. But yeah, I don't have to be afraid of these people, and neither do you. And they are actually afraid of us because there's more of us than there are of them.
Oh yeah.
Just don't participate.
Exactly.
Don't participate. Say I've got something else to do today. Thank you very much. I'm not buying any.
Exactly.
So I'm not buying what you're selling.
Exactly.
And that's all you have to do. And that's, I hung up that phone on the doctor's office and they never called me back. I'm still walking down the street like I'm a ninja. And they're probably, these poor people who work in the medical fields, they're bombarded with all this propaganda all the time.
Oh my goodness.
They live their lives according to that. I've got the better life. Yeah, and I just hope that your listeners will take heart that, we do win. We win.
Excellent.
Just don't dwell on the negative. We've described a lot of, heartbreakingly awful things in this interview. And I just want people to know that you rise above that. You got this.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, Beth Ely, this has been a great session. I really appreciate you spending the time and sharing your depth of experience on these topics. And could you give your email address one more time?
Yes. It's, you know what? There's also a Facebook group that you can join. I don't mind if people from outside the local area join. That's fine. It's called Blue Water Holistic Health Network. That's holistic with an H. Blue Water Holistic Health Network on Facebook. Or you can reach me at elizabeth.ely.nyc@gmail.com. And I also do HIV positive counseling, or I don't want to call it counseling, information centers, sessions, journalism. It's journalism. It's just First Amendment protected speech. I focus on two things. One is the absolute certainty that the science doesn't make sense. Okay, you must know that absolutely, just like I had to know. I put Michael Ellner through 5 hours of research, and if I can put Michael Ellner through 5 hours of research, wow. I mean, I was privileged. Plus the second half of it, which is really the most important half, is why do you still believe this? Because people will look right into the research, see it makes no sense, and still ask, well, what about the babies in Africa? What about my T-cell counts, right?
Right. What about the 22-year-old who died of COVID? Right.
Yeah. What about, I have a relative in a hospital right now. I'm scared.
Yeah.
This hits all of us, and please, everybody, just know that God has not forsaken you. You've got this, and you can live the life of your dreams. You really can.
Beautiful. Well, Beth, thanks again, and hope we talk again some more in the future.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to meet you.